Humanity was on the brink of extinction in justice due to a zombie virus of unknown origin, but as the survivors of divined with each passing day, rumors began to spread about a city where there were almost no zombies. Eager to find this dystopian city, two friends named Lee and Martin trusted the rumors they had heard, jumped into their caravan and set off on their travel. But this journey was not going to be easy, because the number of zombies was increasing rapidly every day. In order to reach this city, they had to pass through one of the worst impacted areas by the invasion, the Knox County. Moreover, because they had traveled a long distance, their RV was almost out of fuel, and they couldn't continue this journey without their caravans, so they decided to pull over and loot the first settlement they found. After stopping at the side of the road and getting out of the caravan, they jumped over the fences to avoid the zombies that had gathered around because of the noise. They didn't have any weapons they could use yet, and fighting them like that for too long would way be in the end of them. Besides that, the last thing they wanted was to be out in the open when it got dark, so before anything, they started walking to find a place where they could take shelter. After walking for a while, they escaped from the zombies chasing them by jumping over the fence again. Here, they encountered a building that looked like an office. They could go into this building to rest for a while and think about what to do next. After traveling by caravan for so long, their food and water supplies were almost exhausted, so as soon as they entered, they ate whatever food they could find and filled their water bottles. Other than that, they didn't get much out of it. They still needed to find more resources and, more importantly, fuel for the RV. And with the number of zombies growing rapidly every day, they had no time to waste. So after looting everything in the building, they decided to split up and go to different areas. It was a risky plan, but it would enable them to continue their journey as quickly as possible, and finding fuel and equipment wasn't their only problem. They also needed to find weapons to defend themselves before the number of zombies became too much to handle, because they had no idea what further difficulties their journey would bring, and they had to be ready for any possibility. Since they didn't have walkie-talkies to communicate with each other, they agreed to meet at the same place before sunset and set off. After a short walk, he came across a restaurant called Pancake House. Here, he filled his stomach, then he took the food that would spoil after a long time to his inventory, but there was no equipment and, more importantly, fuel here, so he decided to leave the building without lingering too long and continue exploring. Martin, just like Lee, found a restaurant, filled his stomach and stored some food for later. Then, after leaving the building and walking for a while, he came across a large mall. This was a perfect place to find items and equipment, but at the same time, there were significantly more zombies here. Even the slightest bite could cost him one of his limbs, perhaps even his life, so he had to be much more careful when he was here. After wandering around the mall for a while, Martin decided to enter from a place where there were only a few zombies. The door he entered apparently led to a warehouse. At first, Martin hoped to find some useful equipment here, but he soon realized that it was just a food depot, so there was nothing around but canned food and sacks of vegetables. He had already found enough food and didn't want to return to the caravan with only potatoes. Although they will certainly need food in the future, for now, they had much bigger problems ahead of them, so he went up the stairs and started exploring the second floor of the mall. After finding more food upstairs, he went into an office, but again, there was nothing but useless things like pens and paper. Therefore, he decided to go back downstairs. Shortly after, he found himself in a large supermarket filled with all kinds of items. With the equipment he would find here, they could get out of the city in one piece, so he started looking through the shelves to find something useful, and shortly after, he found a backpack. After putting the food he collected into it and making some space in his inventory, he found another backpack for Lee and a crowbar he could use as a weapon. When he finished looting all the valuable items in the market, he decided to explore the remaining areas of the mall, and after a while, he found the farming section. In fact, with the materials he will find here, they could set up a small farm after escaping the city and solve their food problems, but their only priority now was to escape from the city before the number of zombies became unbearable, so he didn't have the luxury of filling his inventory with items that will be useful for later. Therefore, he left empty-handed from here, but his misfortune didn't last long, because shortly after, he came across the hardware section of the mall, which contained the most valuable items he could find in there. Here, he found a hammer, then a wrench, and then he found what he was really looking for, an axe. Before the zombie apocalypse began, Martin made a living as a lumberjack. Therefore, he was very good at using an axe. In the early days of the pandemic, he had learned firsthand that he could defend himself with his axe when confronted by these creatures, but he had lost his axe a long time ago while fighting zombies, so he could use his axe as his main weapon until he managed to get out of the city. So, with his new weapon in hand, he decided to loot the remaining areas of the mall. Meanwhile, Lee's luck was also on his side, because he had found a gas station after some exploring. Here, he could find the fuel they needed to continue their journey, but since the area around the station was covered with zombies, Lee had to lure them away to a distant place before going in. Lee managed to evade the zombies in the forest. After making sure that the area was clear, he tried to enter through the front door, but the station door was locked. He could have smashed the windows and got inside, but it wouldn't be wise to make a noise and bring all the zombies back here, so he decided to try the back door, and luckily, the back door wasn't locked. As soon as he entered, he started looking at the materials on the shelves. After a short search, he found 3 empty gas cans, which was the item he was looking for, but he decided to keep searching the gas station in the hope of finding something useful before he went out and filled the gas cans. Here, he found some food, as well as medical supplies such as painkillers and bandages. When Lee had nothing more to get from the station, he went outside and used the pump to fill the empty gas cans. With the zombies out of the way, there was nothing left to disturb him, but as the cans filled up, he faced a small problem. 3 full gas cans were too heavy for him to carry, so he had to leave 2 of them on the side of the road. If another traveler like themselves didn't notice the cans, they could stop here and pick them up on their way. Having found enough fuel for the caravan, they didn't need to search around anymore, so even though there was still plenty of time before the meeting, he decided to go back and wait for Martin. Meanwhile, Martin was still searching. He had found a lot of important items and equipment from the mall, but he couldn't find any fuel, and because they couldn't communicate, Martin had no idea that Lee had found fuel. That's why he was going to keep searching until the meeting time comes. However, he was soon faced with a major problem. While looting a supermarket inside the mall, he started to hear zombie voices. When he turned around to check, he saw that a few zombies had noticed him and were trying to get inside. At first, he thought that he could kill the zombies and continue looting the mall, but with the sound of shattering glass, he realized that more zombies were gathering around, so even if he killed the zombies near him, he would attract others' attention. Therefore, he changed his mind and decided to run away. After passing through a corridor and going up the stairs, he found himself in a small room, but when he looked around, he realized that he had made a big mistake. He was trapped in the room, and he had to make a quick decision before the zombies broke through the door. So instead of trying to fight the zombies, which he didn't even know how many there are, he took his hammer, smashed the windows, and threw himself into the darkness. When he looked around, it didn't take him long to realize that he had fallen into a garage. He had managed to evade the zombies, and since he hadn't fallen from too high, he was fine except for a few scratches. But while tending his wounds, he realized that he had put himself in a much worse situation than before. When he broke the windows and jumped down, the sound he made gathered all the zombies around him all to the front of the garage. On top of that, some of these zombies had noticed Martin and began hitting the garage door. Martin looked around in the hope of finding another way out, but he found nothing but a locked steel door. Realizing there was nothing he could do, he sat down, lit a cigarette, and watched the zombies slowly breaking down the garage door. Meanwhile, Lee had returned to the office and was waiting for Martin, but half an hour after the meeting time, Martin was still nowhere to be seen. After some more time had passed, Lee thought that something might have happened to Martin and decided to stop waiting and look for him. After walking for a while, he came across a restaurant and started calling out to Martin in case he was trapped there, but when he didn't get a response, he continued on. Soon after, a large shopping center appeared in front of him. Martin couldn't have gone any further than that, so he started calling his friend once again, and when he heard Martin's voice, he realized that he had found the place where Martin was trapped. When they came to the place where they left the caravan, they realized that there were zombies here too. They couldn't refuel the caravan with zombies roaming around, so they had to get rid of them first. When all the zombies were dead, they started refueling the caravan while Martin looked around. With what they had found in this town, they had enough fuel to get them to the nearest gas station. They also found some water, food, and equipment while looting. So now, there was nothing to stop them from going on, and their journey was just beginning.
Rumors about a city allegedly unaffected by the pandemic grow more and more every day. The Raven Creek. According According to the latest information we've received, people in the quarantined city of Louville have started setting up camps in front of the military control point. Authorities are warning the public not only about the virus, but also about the increasing theft in recent days. Reports indicate that a chain reaction traffic accident has occurred at the intersection road in the Muldruff area. Some conspiracy theorists claim that the outbreak was deliberately initiated by the government as a means of population control. At this moment, electricity has been completely cut off in Knox County. No statement has been made yet regarding whether the issue will be resolved or not.
Lee and Martin had finally made it to Knox County after a long travel, but judging by the map in their hands, they had not yet completed even a tenth of their journey. Moreover, they needed more fuel to continue on their way. However, they learned from the radio that the power was completely cut off in the whole state, so even if they found a gas station, they would also need a generator to get fuel from the pump. So they agreed to stop in a small town on the way to find a generator, if possible, a gas station. But first of all, they had to kill the zombies that came to the sound of the caravan. The last thing they wanted was to come back here and find their only shelter torn apart by zombies. When there were no zombies inside, they decided to part ways as they had done before and search this town until nightfall. After walking for a while, Martin came across two cars that had crashed on the side of the road. In these vehicles, he could find items that could help them survive and maybe even fuel, so he decided to look for them, but he still had a generator to find. Therefore, when he finished here, he decided to push his luck and follow the path ahead, and after a while, he found a house in front of him. After taking care of the former owners of the house, he entered the small shed in the garden, and he found what he really wanted, a generator. But he couldn't pick it up and carry it to the caravan, because he had walked quite a distance, and it wouldn't make sense for him to go back with something so heavy, so they would have to come back here with the caravan to get the generator. But they couldn't do it today, because it would soon be dark, so instead of going back immediately, Martin decided to look at the other house while he was here. Although he hadn't been able to get anything worthwhile inside the house, he had a chance to eat and clean himself after a long time. When he was done here, he set off to the caravan to give good news to his friend Lee. Meanwhile, he had found a shop and started looting it. After collecting useful things from the shelves and feeding himself, he found new and clean clothes to wear. With these clothes, they could protect themselves from the coming cold weather. Although they didn't have a calendar to follow, Lee was sure that they had entered the winter season, judging by the decreasing temperature day by day. For this reason, after putting some clothes in his bag for his friend Martin, he decided to return to the caravan as it got dark. Unlike last time, they managed to meet at the right hour without any problems. However, even though they were safe in their caravan, it wouldn't be wise to try to sleep while the caravan was standing in the middle of the road, because when they woke up, there was a chance that they would suddenly find themselves surrounded by hundreds of zombies. For this reason, after entering the caravan and arranging the items they found, they decided to investigate the surroundings again. But they couldn't afford to split up at night, so even though their chance of finding what they were looking for would be halved, they agreed to at least stuck together after dark. After walking in the dark for a while, they found the second thing they were looking for, the gas station, but they had some problems to overcome. Firstly, the gas pump needed a source of energy to run, so they would have to bring the generator here, but with dozens of zombies near the station, it would have been a foolish idea to try. Therefore, if they wanted to continue on their way, they had to get rid of the zombies here first. When the zombies became too much for them to handle, they decided to stop fighting and run away. And shortly after, they came across a building where they could take shelter. With dozens of zombies chasing them, it was a risky idea to lock themselves in 4 walls, but they had no other choice. They had to wait here at least until morning. However, their despair began to fade as they looked inside the building they entered. It seems they had stumbled into a gun shop by chance. With the weapons they would find here, they could escape from the building they were trapped and protect themselves during their journey. So while they waited for the sun to rise, they decided to loot anything that might be useful for them. And as the sun began to set, they agreed to go outside and try out their new weapons. It didn't take them long to realize that what they had done was a big mistake. When they fired their guns, they attracted 3 new ones for every zombie they killed. Besides, Martin had fallen and hurt his leg while running away from the zombies. Because of this mistake, they had lost the option of going to the gas station they found, so they got into their caravan as quickly as possible and set off for the generator Martin had found. When they got close to the house, they loaded the generator into their vehicle before the zombies reached their location. Events didn't develop as they expected, leading them to change their plans. It was no longer possible to use the main road, which they had previously thought to be the safest option. Because of the gunshots, the road they were going to leave the town had turned into a sea of zombies. At the same time, the fact that they couldn't obtain gas from the station meant that they had very little fuel left, so they had to take the shortcut if they wanted to reach the next gas station. But there was still one more problem to be solved. They hadn't slept for days while driving the caravan, and with him like that, it was out of the question for them to keep going. So Martin had to take over the caravan for a while. Although he had never driven a car before, they had no other choice. They would either break non-existent traffic rules or wait here and die. Martin had a big accident due to his inexperience and the road they were traveling on. The worst part was that, as a result of this accident, the engine of the caravan was broken. Their caravan was like a moving house for them. Especially in a world full of zombies, such a privilege was an unimaginable luxury. However, it was now impossible for them to continue on the road with their caravan. Moreover, the weather was getting colder every day, which meant that hard days were ahead of them. The last thing they would want is to be caught in a storm without a car underneath them. Although leaving their caravan behind will make their journey much more difficult, they didn't have much time. They had to find a new vehicle at all costs. Therefore, after taking the most necessary supplies and saying goodbye to their caravans, they started to continue on their way on foot. Even though there was no settlement in sight, according to the map in their hands, this path should have led them to a new town. On the bright side, there weren't many zombies this far from the city, so at least they didn't have to worry until they reached the town. After hours of walking, it didn't take them long to realize that they were approaching the town when the zombies appeared again. After killing them and looting their belongings, they continued on. However, when they got a little further, they realized that there were actually a lot more zombies in front of them, so they decided to run towards the town. It seemed that the number of zombies in the city was growing faster than they had expected. Even though this situation worried them about the future of their journey, they had a more important problem for now. Martin managed to get rid of the zombies at the end of the rush, but when he looked around, he realized that Lee wasn't around. At first, he thought he had lost him, but he pulled himself together and decided to look for him. If he lost the only person left from his old life, it will be a breaking point for Martin. He was not sure if he could continue traveling alone in such a scenario. Lee could have been trapped somewhere while running away from the zombies, so he had to find his friend no matter what. Once the zombies were out of the way, he started looking for his friend. When he got to the place where he last saw him, he didn't see a corpse. That could have been a good sign, but it could also mean that his friend had turned into a zombie. After hours of searching, Martin found another place where his friend could have taken refuge. The fact that there were zombies gathered in front of the building could mean that his friend had hidden here while fleeing from the zombies, but Martin had to use his axe one last time before he learned the truth. When all the zombies in front of the door were dead, Martin held his breath and went inside, and when he realized that his prediction had been correct, he went to greet his friend. Just as he had predicted, he ran with all his might after the chaos and hid in this military hangar. Although they were happy to meet again, they still had things to do. Therefore, they decided to resume their work without wasting too much time. Their main task was to find a new vehicle and fuel, but they also needed new clothes, and this building they were in had everything they wanted. Therefore, they decided to rest here for a while and change their clothes before continuing on their way. Martin has searched the zombie he had killed and found the key to the locked door. After taking down the zombie here, he decided to investigate inside, and he soon realized it was a military supply depot. The warehouse was full of medical supplies, weapons, and ammunition. One of the boxes even contained a walkie-talkie that would enable them to communicate with each other. Shortly, he had found a paradise by chance while fleeing the zombies. Now, not only did they have plenty of weapons, they also had a good amount of medicine. At the same time, thanks to the walkie-talkies they had found, they wouldn't find themselves in a situation like the one they had just experienced. After looting everything that could be useful to them, they went out to continue their main mission. Although the accident with the caravan had cost them a lot of time, if they could find a working car on top of that, they might still have a chance to complete their journey. However, in a city like this, it would probably be much more difficult than they thought. After a long search in the town, they found a car that could do the job, even though it was damaged. With this vehicle, they could have escaped the city. Naturally, this car they found had a completely empty tank, so they had to find some fuel before they set off. Therefore, after putting the things they had found in their new car, they decided to rest and eat in the restaurant next to them. Even though every passing minute was working against them, sometimes it was necessary to take small breaks in order to keep their sanity. Otherwise, it will be meaningless to stay alive. After resting for a while, they left the restaurant and set off in search of fuel. Since they had left the generator in the caravan, it was no longer possible to get fuel from gas stations. Therefore, they could only obtain fuel by taking it from other vehicles or by finding new full gas cans. But after Lee and Martin walked for a while, something miraculous happened that changed all their plans. They found a repair shop. With the equipment they would get from here, they could replace the caravan's engine with the engine of the new vehicle they found. But while this plan seemed logical, things might not go as they expected. Still, they were determined to try it no matter what. Therefore, they entered the repair shop, closed the door, and started looting inside. Here, as they expected, they found some repair equipment that might be useful, and even a hand axe that Martin could use. After looting the garage during the night, they decided to go out again in the morning to look for a vehicle that might have fuel in it, because even though they had obtained the necessary equipment to fix the caravan, they had not found any gas cans. In fact, they still had enough fuel in their caravan to reach this town. However, in order to repair the caravan, they had to take this new vehicle to the accident site, so they still had to find fuel. Therefore, after loading the equipment they found into the trunk of the car, they set off again. As they moved further into the town, they finally managed to find a little fuel and make progress. When there were no zombies around to bother them, they decided to go into the nearby building to rest for a while and have some food. At the same time, if they stood in the rain for too long, they could get sick, and with so much going on, getting sick could have been the end of them. After feeding themselves in the building they entered, they read the magazines they found while waiting to dry. Then, they went back to work. When they went outside, they decided to check the nearby gas station first. Then, they agreed to look at the huge trailer of the truck standing next to the station. However, not finding what they were looking for, they headed for the gas station. After having a snack inside, they entered the warehouse of the building, but as usual, they only found empty gas cans, so they set off again to complete their mission before it got dark. Despite searching the town all day, they couldn't find any fuel. Moreover, it got dark and started to rain again. However, just when they were about to give up, they came across an accident site. It was impossible for these cars to crash without fuel in them, so if someone else hadn't already taken the fuel, they still had hope. And just as they had predicted, when they found fuel in both vehicles, they realized that their luck was still with them. With this, they finally managed to get enough fuel to reach the caravan. All that remained was to put some fuel into their new car and set off for their caravan. When they arrived back at the accident site, they repaired the engine of the car while Martin started to load the items they found into the caravan. Then, he drove the fuel from the car they had brought here and transferred it to the caravan. In fact, from now on, they could have traveled with two cars. However, Martin didn't want to drive again after his accident. Moreover, he was using parts from this new vehicle to repair the caravan, and they didn't have time to find parts for a second vehicle. After several hours of repairing, he was finally able to fix the engine, but he couldn't replace the broken windscreen of the caravan with the windscreen of the new car, because they needed a much bigger window for the caravan. Actually, they found a big truck at the last gas station they had been to, so they could have taken the window out of that truck and tried to put it in the caravan. Besides, they had to stop there anyway to get fuel, and now there was nothing to stop them from setting off. After Lee parked the caravan next to the pump, he started to remove the window out of the truck as planned, and while Lee was working on it, Martin connected the generator to the station to start it up. The generator also required fuel to run, so Martin took some fuel from their caravan and transferred it to the generator. Then, leaving the rest of the work to his friend Lee, he decided to go to the gas station for a snack. While Martin was dealing with the zombies, he had managed to attach the window of the truck to their caravan and had almost finished refueling it, so now they could return to their journey after a long time. Thus, after Martin took the generator and got into the caravan, they set off again. After traveling through the night, they encountered a problem. According to the map, the road that will get them to their destination in the fastest way possible was apparently blocked by cars, so their journey was interrupted again for reasons beyond their control. But before deciding what to do, they agreed to pull the caravan over and check the condition of the road. Although they didn't find anything important after a few hours of searching, they were sure of one thing: if they wanted to continue their journey, they had to take the long way round. Even though this would prolong their journey for days, they were used to such things. If they wanted to survive, they had to be prepared for anything. After traveling for several hours, they came across a large warehouse in the middle of nowhere. They had been traveling for a long time, so they hadn't slept for a while. Besides, it was going to be dark soon, and they couldn't be sure if they would run into another big problem. Even on such difficult days, having a moment to themselves would have boosted their moods. For this reason, they decided to stay here and spend the night while they found a safe area where they could bring their caravan. The next morning, after filling the dust gas cans in their vehicles, they set off for their new route. After days on the road, the snowfall had increased and turned into a storm. On top of that, this storm was getting worse every day. But as they wondered what could be worse, they slowly began to lose hope with the appearance of smashed cars on far away. Apparently, they had reached the source of the news they had heard on the radio. This must be the Mudra roundabout, but for the time being, it was useless to think about it. If they didn't want to freeze to death, they had to find a spot where they could move their caravan as soon as possible. This time they were lucky. There was an opening in the external side which their caravan could pass, so they would definitely see the next day. But even if they had somehow survived here, they could not say the same for the future of their journey, because they were running out of fuel and much worse days were ahead of them. The storm not only made it impossible to stay outside, but also made it difficult for them to find their way. And even worse, the map they were using was useless in this region, because the part showing the path they were on was erased because of the bloodstain. Under these circumstances, they had only two options to choose from. Either they would turn left and try to pass through the town, or they would take a big gamble and head towards the path that had been erased by the bloodstain. Although it was something not to risk their journey by following the sea road they knew, encountering a block road again will be the end of them, as they didn't have any more fuel left. At the same time, traveling through the sea meant that they would encounter more zombies, so they had no choice but to take this gamble. It didn't take them long to realize that they had made a big mistake when trees appeared in front of them after a few hours. It seems they had lost their gamble, so they had no choice but to go back. As expected, they had wasted a large part of their already limited fuel, and it was uncertain whether they could reach the next gas station with the remaining fuel in their tanks. While they were trying to get back to the crossroads, they ran out of fuel as they predicted and were stuck on the road. In short, they had to continue on foot. However, if they had stayed outside for more than a few hours in such a violent storm, they would have frozen to death. In fact, they still had enough supplies in their caravan to keep them alive for days. But starvation was not the real problem before them. Every day they wasted, the zombie population in the sea was growing exponentially, so they had to leave their caravans and find a settlement where they could get fuel. For this reason, they made their last preparations, took their most necessary items and set off despite the storm. They had already lost their sense of direction because of the storm that had been raging for days, so they didn't know their location according to the map. But soon, they regained their confidence as they came across a vaguely narrow path. If they were lucky, this path might lead them to a place of shelter. As it got dark, they finally managed to find a place to take shelter. They could avoid freezing to death by spending the night in this cabin, so they quickly began to search inside. When they searched out and made sure that it was safe inside, they agreed to spend the night here. But someone had to stand guard just in case. Even though it was unlikely that zombies had followed them here in the storm, they had to be ready for anything. Therefore, Martin went out to keep watch. When his fire went out, Martin stopped his guarding and went back inside. There was no danger inside, and he didn't want to faint from lack of sleep the next morning walking in the storm, so he decided to go and take a nap. However, he was soon woken up by the sound of gunfire from outside. They had no idea who fired the gun or for what purpose, but they were sure that the sun would attack dozens of zombies. Although they had the option of trying to escape, they didn't know how many zombies were out there because of the fog. At the same time, they could have been the target of these bullets, so they had no choice but to defend that if they wanted to survive. After running non-stop for a while, Lee managed to escape the zombies chasing him with the help of the forest. But there was one small problem. Even though he called out to his friend using the walkie-talkie they had found, nothing could be heard but a static sound. There was no signal, probably because they were in the forest, so Lee decided to look for an open area before trying to reach to his friend again. When he finally found an open space like the one he was looking for, he called his friend again. And he made his way to the place Martin had told him. After a while, Lee realized that he had found his friend Martin when he saw the zombie corpses. Then he started walking towards the building without wasting any time. Lee and Martin were able to meet again safe and sound. However, they had no choice but to wait for the storm to pass before going out, so they decided to stay in this bar at least until the storm calmed down. After a few days in the pub, they had finally recovered from the fatigue of traveling for days. At the same time, the storm had calmed down and it was much safer to go out exploring, so there was only one obstacle left for them to resume their goal. They had to find fuel for their caravan, so they set off again to complete their mission. After a short while, they came across a gas station. They were surprised that what they needed had been right under their noses all this time, but they would have to get their generator back to get fuel from here, so they should have come back here after they got their caravans, but they still had the chance to find gas cans at the station. At the same time, they would have to secure the area before they could bring their caravans here, so they began to kill the zombies around the station. Martin took care of the zombies while they checked the shells inside, and luckily he found 2 empty gas cans. The next step was to search the town for vehicles with fuel in their tanks and siphon the fuel out of them. As they explored the town, they soon attracted the attention of the zombies, and every zombie heading towards them brought another. But this time, they couldn't afford to run away from them. They had to find fuel before it was too late, so Lee made a quick decision by drawing his gun and began shooting at dirt that was chasing them. He didn't have enough ammunition to kill even a tenth of dirt in front of them, but killing them wasn't his intention. If they wanted to return from here with their lance fuel, someone needed to draw attention to themselves. Martin couldn't ask Lee why he was shooting at zombies, but he understood that his friend was trying to buy him time. For this reason, while Lee made noise, Martin started running to avoid the zombies following him. When Martin was sure that he had escaped the zombies chasing him, he began siphoning fuel from the nearby cars. After he finished, he used his walkie-talkie to call Lee to the police station he found. Once he had killed the last of the zombies, he sat down on the ground to rest and wait for his friend Lee. When they arrived at the police station, he and Martin started running towards the nearby trees to avoid the zombies chasing them. But when they were in the open again, they encountered other zombies. Even though the tactic they had just used had been effective, they didn't have enough ammunition to do the same, so they had no choice but to get rid of the zombies the hard way. The battle lasted for hours and finished as the sun set. Although they were exhausted to the point of fainting, there wasn't a single zombie left to bother them, and what they got was well worth the effort, because when Martin was checking the car he found, he realized that the key was still on the car, and there was even a small amount of fuel left in the vehicle's tank, so they found their ticket out of the town. Therefore, they put the fuel they obtained in the vehicle and set off for their caravan. When they came to the place where they had left the caravan, they started to transfer fuel from the vehicle to the caravan. Then they decided to go inside and rest until the morning, because as they had experienced, the few hours they had to spend sleeping couldn't be worse than setting off without any rest. When they returned to the gas station, they found new zombies, even though they had cleared the area before. It seemed impossible to complete the next few days without killing any more zombies. When they had eliminated all nearby dangers, they started refueling their caravans. If they were lucky, they could drive to the end of the city with the fuel they got from here. But after all they had been through, it was impossible to make any definite predictions about anything. After days of traveling, the stormy days came to an end as the snow ceased falling and the rain began to fall. Moreover, thanks to the last gas station they had been to, there was enough fuel left in their vehicle to keep them going for a while. But in any case, they would need even more, because they were heading for Louisville, the most dangerous place in the city. And since Louisville was full of zombies, it was almost impossible to try to look for fuel in there. So they decided to refuel their caravan one last time before entering the city. When they entered the building, they triggered the security alarm. At first, they thought of fighting the zombies that came here, but they immediately gave up this ridiculous idea, and they decided to enter the large building that was near the station. Apparently, it was a clothing warehouse. Since they had been wearing the same clothes for a long time, their clothes had turned into rags. So, on the bright side, they could find new and clean clothes here, while the zombies were distracted by the sound of the alarm. After finding new clothes in the warehouse and putting them on, they were ready to continue their mission, but they were in no rush to do so they waited for the sun to rise before they started moving again. The next morning, they decided to leave the warehouse and check the surroundings. They saw that the gas station was surrounded by a large horde of zombies after the alarm. At the same time, their caravan was caught in the middle of the earth, but trying to fight them wouldn't have been a wise choice, because there were much simpler and effective ways to get rid of the zombies. Therefore, they decided to repeat the tactics they had used before. Their plan was simple. Martin would refuel their caravan while they attracted the zombies. When they finished here, they continued on their journey. Now, all that was left was to cross the city of Louisville and escape this nightmare. As they were traveling on the main road, they noticed that the bridge they needed to cross was blocked by cars. Although there was a second bridge they could use, they didn't want to deal with the zombies there, so they decided to change direction and take another road. After a few days on the road, they were once again faced with a problem. Apparently, they had to get through this military zone before entering Louisville, but they couldn't risk moving forward in their caravans without knowing what was in front of them, and as far as they could observe, the situation was not in their favor. So before they could move on, they had to make sure that the road was safe to travel on, and they had a good idea for this. They still had plenty of guns and ammunition. Even though firing weapons in the open is usually a bad idea, the military base was completely surrounded by wire fences, so even if they used their weapons here, as long as the doors were closed, no more zombies could come from outside. In short, tonight was going to be a long one. As the sun began to shine, their slaughter had finally come to an end. Now, they were sure that it was safe inside, so they could move on, but while they were at it, they decided to investigate the military base. When they were sure that the road was completely safe, they started walking towards their caravans to continue on their way. They had managed to escape from the military base unharmed, but they still had one last challenge to overcome. To reach their destination, they had to cross the Sea of Louisville. Despite all the zombies in the city, they managed to advance for a while without any problems, but their joy was soon dashed. While traveling on the road, they came across a big accident site. The worst part was that because of the noises made by the caravan, there were dozens of zombies following them here. So Lee took his chance and tried to somehow get past the accident site. And he soon realized that there was no way out, but it was too late. There was only one choice left for them. They had to get the zombies away from the caravan at all costs. Martin had made a fatal mistake while trying to attract the zombies. One of the zombies had took him by surprise and bit his left hand. Although they didn't know much about zombies, they were aware that even the smallest bite was fatal, so at the moment they had a much higher priority than saving their caravan, and they didn't have much time to find a solution to this problem. They had to get rid of the zombies as soon as possible and find shelter. After running until they ran out of breath, they finally came across a place where they could take shelter. By entering this building, they could look at the status of the bite and make plans for the future. After finding a room inside where they could stay for now, they began killing the zombies around. When Lee was sure that the building was completely safe, he returned to his friend. They had to accept the truth, even if it was hard. Martin had been bitten, and if they didn't make a quick decision, it would be a certain death. There were only two options to choose from. Either Lee would execute his friend before the virus took over his body, or they would solve the problem by amputating the bitten limb, and Martin chose to live. However, all the necessary equipment to make this operation was left in their caravans, so Lee started to search the apartment to find something useful. He had managed to find a saw not long after, so he began to move towards his friend, and all that remained was to amputate the bitten limb. By the time they finished, Martin had already fainted from blood loss. Although he had prevented his friend from turning into a zombie, he had a new problem to solve. Due to lack of equipment and knowledge, what they did was more like butchery than an operation. Martin had lost more blood than he should have, and he needed antibiotics to prevent infection. In fact, they had all the medical equipment they needed in their caravan, but Lee couldn't take such a risk alone. Moreover, Lee's death meant certain death for Martin as well, so the lives of two comrades now depended on Lee's decision. But just as he was about to lose hope, he remembered something. As they entered the city of Louisville, they passed near a hospital. Lee could get everything he needed to save his friend from here, so he left Martin in the room and set off for the hospital. After several hours of walking, he finally managed to reach the hospital, but he didn't want to bring all those zombies after him. For this reason, he decided to get rid of the nearby zombies before finding a way to get inside. he had managed to find a way in, but he had to work quickly to get the necessary materials. Otherwise, there was a possibility that he might find himself trapped in the hospital because of the noises he was making. At the same time, every second he wasted, his friend's chance of survival decreased even more. After wandering around the hospital for a while, he finally found the materials he was looking for, but before he could collect them, he had to kill the zombies here. After removing all the trash inside, he took all the necessary medical equipment into his bag one by one, but the sounds made while fighting the zombies inside attracted other zombies nearby, so he had to get out of the hospital as soon as possible. He somehow made it out of the hospital alive, but he had wasted much more time here than he had expected. He had to get these medicines to Martin before it was too late. When he arrived at the place where he left his friend, he found the door destroyed. But as he waited to encounter Martin's body inside, he was filled with hope again by what he saw. Apparently, Martin escaped from the zombies by jumping out of the windows, but for the time being, there was no time to relax. Martin couldn't have gone much further after losing so much blood, and he might still be in trouble. Therefore, Lee began to head towards the place where Martin had jumped. When Lee went downstairs, he found no trace of his friend except bloodstains, but it was enough to lead him to Martin. As he moved away from the apartment, the blood traces became thinner and eventually stopped, but they had found the place he was looking for. Martin couldn't have gone any further than this house. He called out to his friends but didn't get any response, and there was only one place left to look. When he went in, he found Martin sitting on the floor covered in blood. He had managed to save his friend, and it seemed that amputating the bitten limb had worked. Martin was a little exhausted from all the blood he had lost, but he showed no signs of zombification. However, even though Martin needed to rest to fully recover, there was still a caravan that needed to be rescued, and if they didn't want any more trouble, they had to be out of the town before dark. What they had to do was simple. While Lee would save the caravan from where it was stuck, Martin would fire his gun to attract the zombies. Although they sacrificed a lot for this cause, they finally managed to get out of the Nox County. Now, all that remained was to set off for the sea they had heard about. They didn't know what more difficulties life would throw at them, but they were not going to back down no matter what. So that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your opinion in the comments. See you in the next one. Goodbye.